as frustrated as we as the parents are when our children are dysregulated and subsequently, quote, misbehaving, our child is not thrilled with that either. It doesn't feel good to them.
On today's episode of A Catch Conversation, Parenting the Mental Health Generation, we're talking about our dysregulated children. Why are we seeing such challenging behavior in our kids? Welcome. I'm Amy Oberholzer, the founder and executive director of Catch, Community Action Together for Children's Health, based in Chicago's northern suburbs.
And I'm Dr. Lisa Novak. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, and as a Catch board member, I'm serving as the liaison between Catch and the mental health providers in our community.
And together, we are the hosts of Catch Conversations, Parenting the Mental Health Generation, a place where we discuss the topics that concern us as loved ones of young people struggling with their mental health.
Today, we are so excited to speak with Dr. Lee Weiss. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of Coping Partners, which is a group practice in Northbrook that supports the mental health of children, teens, and families.
Put in your AirPods, take 30 minutes for you, and join our conversation with Dr. Lee Weiss. So why don't we just jump right in and start out with the basics here. Dr. Weiss, what does emotional dysregulation actually look like in kids? And maybe you and Lisa both can jump in so that we could address both younger kids and teens.
Sure. So when we talk about someone who's emotionally dysregulated, we're essentially describing someone who has difficulty coping with intense emotions, big emotions. And so you're seeing someone have a bigger reaction than we think they ought to for what seems like a smaller sized problem. So I always think about toddlers as a perfect example of someone who is emotionally dysregulated. They don't get the right plate at the dinner table. They get the blue plate instead of the pink plate, and they throw a gigantic fit, and it is the end of the world. That is sort of what I picture as emotional dysregulation. And so in younger kids, this can manifest in different ways. It can manifest in sleep disorders, tantrums, as I said, behavioral kind of issues, but it also can be more serious in bigger kids. They always say little kids, little problems, big kids, big problems. So more intense tantrums, disordered eating, even self-injurious behaviors, for example.
I sort of like to think of it sometimes as the ready, fire, aim of emotions. There is no pausing to think about a reaction, really being very impulsive in having that reaction and struggling to regulate, struggling to manage, struggling, as you said, Lee, to cope with whatever it is that we're facing in that moment.
We're hearing a lot from parents in our community that, the after school hours, the evening hours are difficult. And they're difficult for a wide variety of reasons. Kids are fighting or refusing to do their homework. Kids are isolating in their room. There are a lot more tantrums, a lot more easily, kids that are more easily crying. I think part of the reason why we wanted to have this conversation today is to help parents reframe why they might be seeing those behaviors in their kids. Can you sort of explain better to our audience why our children might be acting that way, or how they can think about kids' behavior differently than just misbehavior?
Yeah, I think any time that people or kids experience stressors in life, right, whatever the stressor looks like, we expect some regression, kind of going backward a little bit developmentally from what we'd expect. And so if you think about the fact that we've all experienced this collective trauma, the pandemic and everything else that comes with it, I think people are feeling, and the kids are certainly feeling, like the world feels less safe than it used to. Unfortunately, some of these kids have had what we call big T traumas. So, parents getting sick, some even dying, loss of jobs, And then littler things like isolation, having to go through that whole e-learning experience that was pretty stressful for most. And there's just overall a serious sense of lack of control. And then now, we're all kind of re-entering this next phase due to, thank God, science and vaccines. And so we're all re-entering at different stages and paces. And I think for a lot of people, that's stressful. A lot of my kiddos that I see who have anxiety, for example, or separation anxiety, were thrilled to be home with their parents. And they never had to kind of deal with the drop-offs and things like that. And so this comes with stress too, even though we want to move in this direction. I think they're experiencing a tremendous amount of stress. In addition, I think that parents are still, again, experiencing stress, and that trickles down. So the regression that we're seeing in the form of tantrums and power struggles and just all of this makes sense to us as professionals. It's not easy to deal with as parents, I can attest, but it makes sense. And I think that, we're not done with these big feelings and kind of coping with them. But to your point, we do want to acknowledge the feelings underlying the behaviors and not just look at the tantrums and say, oh, how could they be doing that, right? To have some empathy for what they're struggling with. And for each kid, it's going to be different.
To add that, one thing that we know helps with regulation, with helping our kids feel more stable, is having that structure and consistency and predictability. And we really lost so much of that through the pandemic. And there was so much unknown and so much need to shift and pivot. And it really did all become so unpredictable. And so the things that I think, whether or not parents even realized they were relying on previously as strategies that were effective for them, all sort of fell by the wayside all at the same time. And I think we're working hard to rebuild some of that and to put some of that predictability and structure back in place. But it's a process, and it's taken us some time to get there.
There are a couple things that I want to reflect on here. Are you guys suggesting that we need to kind of change or reframe our expectations of our kids because of the way they're feeling and what their emotions might be? That would be one question I have. And then the second one I want to follow up on that sort of goes along with it is, if in fact the behavior is being caused by an increase in emotional trauma or emotional struggle, how do we help our kids acknowledge those feelings? And how do we bring those feelings out? And I'm sure the answer will be different across the ages, will it not?
If I can kind of answer your second question first, just because that kind of triggered me. I think there is absolutely the expectation that we have to work on the behavior. We can't just sort of like let it slide forever, right? It is a learned skill. How do they cope with these emotions? And we have to practice how to regulate like any other skill. But I think that if we help the children name that underlying emotion first, that's going to be one effective strategy to help them kind of feel more in control over their behavior. So there's a phrase, name it to tame it, coined by Daniel Siegel. And the idea is that when kids are really flooded emotionally, I mean, you've seen a kid having a temper tantrum on the floor, like limbs flailing, their logical brain is not working, right? The emotional brain has hijacked the whole system. And so when we help children name it to tame it by saying something like, I wonder if you're feeling scared, right? Or I wonder if you're feeling, right, fill in the blank. Once they name that emotion, it helps them access the left, more logical brain, which actually helps sort of integrate the whole brain in a way and helps them calm down. And once they're calmer, they're able to be more rational because the primitive brain, again, is sort of not the only brain in control. So helping them label feelings, I think, is a really easy and important step, and they feel understood. Right? So if you say, I wonder if you're feeling scared, and hopefully you've actually gotten the right emotion, they'll feel like my mom gets it, my teacher gets it, and they can calm down, and then you'll see the behavior kind of decrease, the unwanted behavior. So I think that's one helpful, easy strategy.
I think in line with that, really being able to empathize with our kids that they are struggling so much right now. We see that, we feel that, we are internalizing that and understanding that is going to go a long way too. As one of our favorites, Dr. Ross Green always says, kids do well when they can. And I think it's important to note also that as frustrated as we as the parents are when our children are dysregulated and subsequently, quote, misbehaving, our child is not thrilled with that either. It doesn't feel good to them. They don't want to be tantruming. They don't want to be screaming. They don't want to be getting into these power struggles either. It feels truly out of their control in those moments. And so our response to that, really making sure that it comes from an empathic place and not a shaming place that will inadvertently sort of further their negative emotionality and actually probably make the dysregulation even worse, really sort of grounds them and us for handling the situation more effectively.
And that's easier said than done. meaning as parents, we see them flooded, right? It triggers us. We're already spread thin, right? I feel for all the parents out there who are working from home suddenly, right? And navigating a heck of a lot more. It's a lot. And so I want to be clear that while one tip would be keep your emotions in check for the parents, because we know that modeling self-regulation and even having a soothing voice and talking slower helps our kids. In the heat of the moment, when the kid is flailing, it is hard to do that well. So again, in a perfect world, we'd help parents by really, taking their own timeouts, modeling calming down and coming back after they're again regulated. But we know we aren't perfect, and unfortunately, this is part of, I think, what is also happening in families that we're seeing is the kids are dysregulated. The parents then, instead of really modeling better regulation, are matching the intensity, and it escalates and it becomes really out of control, and everyone feels more dysregulated by the end. So, parents need to take care of themselves in whatever way they can.
So this might be skipping around just a little bit, but I'm thinking about some of the inquiries that we've gotten at Catch since the beginning of the pandemic. And this conversation that the three of us are having right now feels to me as though we're talking about the younger set of kids. The dysregulation is in that group of kids is more sort of behaviorally outside of themselves. Whereas the teens we're hearing are isolating. They're closing the door to their room. They don't want to come out. They don't want to go to school. They don't want to see their friends. That's dysregulation too, right?
Absolutely. I think the terms there are whether or not they're engaging in either externalizing or internalizing behaviors, both of which are, completely symptomatic of the same things, whether we're talking about either, sadness more broadly or depression more specifically, whether we're talking about anxiety, stresses, traumas, whatever it may be. There are lots of different ways that can manifest. And certainly I think, trend-wise, there is a tendency to be more externalization for the youngsters. And, many of the teens that I see in my practice are engaging more in those internalizing behaviors, which also, frankly, just looks like a lack of motivation to do anything altogether. And so that's spilling over into schoolwork and other arenas as well.
And so is the strategy similar for parents to try to help them identify the feelings behind this isolation or self-harm, as you mentioned, so the strategy is the same though for parents to try to get them to say what it is that's causing them to dysregulate in this way. Is that what you're saying?
I think that it can be. I think that parents can help teens understand their triggers. So God forbid there's a teenager who is, engaging in self-harm or, any other Any other thing that's really counterproductive because they're feeling this intense wave of emotion, the parents can sort of help them to name the emotion and help them ride it. So ride that wave, knowing this wave is not going to last forever, right? We just kind of have to wait it out. It's uncomfortable to feel intense anxiety or intense anger or intense disappointment. I mean, nobody enjoys that, but they're not necessarily dangerous. And so if a therapist or a parent can help a teen to learn how to stay calm, it's really called distress tolerance skills, how to just kind of sit with that and do something else, whether to distract themselves from that or to self-soothe, it will pass eventually. Emotions don't last forever and they don't have to be dangerous. So I always try to help people realize if they can kind of get more comfortable being uncomfortable, that in and of itself is a huge life skill.
I think parents also very understandably have this incredible urge to fix the problem for their kids or their teens. And that's not necessarily what their teenager needs in that moment. And so while we might want to, come in and say, okay, you're feeling isolated. How do we come up with more social opportunities for you? And what can we do to make this better? Sometimes that can actually feel even more overwhelming for them. And they may not feel quite as heard as just simply being there to validate the feeling, to let them know, again, that you're recognizing that they're struggling. And then, as Lee said, to really just help them ride that, even if there isn't necessarily a solution to that problem in the immediacy.
And sometimes it's a hug, right? Sometimes it's repeating verbatim pretty much what you hear the teen saying. So I always teach parents this trick where you say, it sounds like, it's an old therapist trick, right? It sounds like, and you repeat pretty much exactly what your teen just said to you, right? And all of a sudden they'll look at you like, oh my gosh, you get it. And that experience of being heard and being understood is incredibly therapeutic because someone is with you in that intense emotion and gets it. Like Dr. Novak said, it doesn't have to be that they swoop in and problem solve and make it all better. And unfortunately, we usually can't as they get to be teenagers because the problems are a little bit more bigger. We can't pick up the phone and call mom and problem solve, right? It's usually at that point a bigger thing that they have to deal with.
So the validation of what they're feeling is a gigantic piece of this. And what I think I hear you guys saying is that we should not be afraid of saying the words, of saying the emotions, of validating what's happening, even though they could be frightening emotions.
Yes. And I'm thinking about the part one of your question too. And I think it ties in really nicely here. You had asked Amy about this idea of, do we have to change our expectations as parents right now? And I think my answer to that is an overwhelming yes. Just as much as we are feeling flooded, I think part of that is that there are so many different areas of our lives where things may not be going as well as we want them to. And to feel like we have to solve it all or be right back to, pre-COVID times in terms of our socialization and in terms of our academic achievement and in terms of our emotion regulation and all of these other things just feels like a completely unfair and unrealistic expectation. And so I've been doing a lot of encouraging for the families that I work with to really pick the battles here and change our expectations in a few arenas, really focusing primarily on the emotional health of our kids. And so if this is all playing out in terms of work not getting turned in or grades slipping a little bit, I understand that can be a concern. I really very much do. And we also know that if kids are struggling emotionally, they're simply not available for learning. And so when we are helping them become more regulated emotionally, we are in turn going to help them later manage those other arenas of their life more successfully too.
We should absolutely be a little bit more empathic and understanding when they're falling apart a little bit. And again, I think adults are too, if we're honest with ourselves. I think you're going to see adults sort of losing it a little bit more than they wish they would. So we haven't gone back to normal, right? yet.
Okay, so since I'm the representative parent in this conversation, I do think I need to ask or have us converse about. All of us parents, you two included, I'm sure, are at the ends of our rope sometimes. This is an exhausting time of life and stressful. So how do we access our own place of calm, our own place of rational, our own place of, yep, I'm the parent, I'll be the adult here, I'm not going to lose my mind. Like, what are some strategies that you can give to us to help us be able to engage with our kids in this positive manner to help them become more regulated?
I think what you're describing is the age old adage, put on your put on your own oxygen mask first idea, which sounds cheesy, I know, but it really is true. And everyone's self-care looks a little bit different. But the idea that we as parents need to tend to ourselves in order to stay calm and regulated and model that and deal with all of this is really true. And so it could be as simple as, eating right, getting exercise, getting enough sleep, getting a massage, having adult time, leaving the house, getting fresh air, being in nature, having some informal support groups, whether it's, like a group of mom friends, or an actual therapy, whatever you need. I have one client who loves nature, and she will go out and take, trips outside, just 2 nights by herself. So you need to have all of those things working for you, whatever that looks like in your own life, in order to be able to do this hard work, which it is at all stages, whether they're little toddlers or teenagers. It's hard work.
One of the best forms of self-care is just more compassion with ourselves, that we're actually not going to get it right all the time, and that's okay. I think, we often expect, some form of perfection as parents. And then we, get so upset with ourselves, and the guilt and the shame just spirals when we do have that parenting moment where we didn't keep our cool the way that we had really hoped to, and we didn't walk away when we wished that we had. And being able to go back and say, that doesn't make me a terrible parent, and I haven't done any irreparable damage here, and actually using it as an opportunity to repair and to move through and to model for our kids that we too are not perfect, that we will make mistakes, but that we can come together and work through that as well. I know that's something I'm always working on for myself.
And there's an old phrase, the be a good enough mother, what is that? Winnicott or Freud? I don't know, it's way old school, Winnicott. So that idea that you're not supposed to be perfect, and there's definitely no way you're going to be perfect during this pandemic that we've been experiencing. So, or any major stressor in life. So being empathic, absolutely. I agree with Dr. Novak. Being empathic is hugely important with yourself. And again, being a parent of younger children, sometimes I feel guilty if I need to put them in front of a screen, because I know screen time is not great for the kids, but it's sometimes it's okay. And just to know I need this for me right now. I need the hour, right? So just understanding we all cannot possibly be perfect.
So in the spirit of giving our parents really some specific strategies, let's imagine that we've all taken a nice walk in nature and counted to 10, and we are now ready to sort of help our kids access the way they're feeling so that we can, get to the bottom really of what the behaviors are that we're seeing. Other than, I wonder if you're feeling scared, the way you suggested, Dr. Wise, are there any other specific strategies that you can give to parents, maybe both of younger kids and of teens, to really help them access those emotions?
Yes. And I think one of them is by coaching them. So parents can coach kids and teenagers through distressing situations, how to stay calm, right? Basically how to practice staying calm in their bodies. So an example, most kids tend to be a little bit, I would call, addicted to screens. So simply taking away an electronic device, an iPad, a video game, can cause an outburst, a behavioral outburst, right? And we see this with teens all the time, and younger ones as well. So parents can coach kids through this by saying, I know it's really hard when you have to say goodbye or end your electronic time. I know you really look forward to this each day or each week or whatever. But we can't scream and throw things or whatever they're seeing when it's time to be done with, screen time. So we're going to practice this, and you scaffold it. So you make it a simpler thing at first. Like maybe we're going to just practice. So I'm going to give you the iPad for 2 minutes, and we're going to practice you giving it back to me really nicely. And then we're going to do it again. You don't make them be in their most intense moment of they're going to beat their best level ever and then try this, right? And you can reward them for good behavior because, again, it feels good in your body and the kids' bodies if they can stay calm. So you're kind of giving them little practices of staying calm and rewarding them. And as they are older, and even little ones, you can give them tools for how to stay calm, whether it's, breathing, a lot of the sensory work, like think of, again, squishing something if that's helpful, or sucking a lemon drop and really thinking about the intense lemony flavor. It can be anything with the senses, engaging them, but helping parents coach kids and teens through just sitting with the discomfort and tolerating it rather than having this huge reaction externally or internally.
I think any opportunities to start sort of reimposing some of that additional structure and predictability is really helpful as well. So previewing with our kids or teens what is actually coming next, or what the weekend is going to look like, or helping them to create additional structure around when it's time to do our homework, and what are the expectations and the plans around that, so that there's a little bit more mutual understanding and they can kind of prepare themselves for what's to come, instead of feeling constantly surprised or disappointed in the moment, which is going to inherently increase, I think, the emotionality.
So and you're talking about control too, Dr. Novick. So helping them have some control over decisions in their life. So you give them a menu of 2 acceptable choices about their schedule, let's say, so they at least feel like they're being heard. And, because again, we're living in a world that feels a lot out of our control.
So it sort of seems like the goal is help our kids understand and help ourselves understand what's driving our kids' behavior, identifying that, validating that feeling, but then eventually moving towards sort of the dialectic. Yep, you feel stinky today. You feel scared today. However, you still need to come down to dinner or go to school or whatever it might be. Is that sort of how you see this conversation about dysregulation moving forward?
Yes, it's a balance. You can't just say, okay, they're feeling intensely anxious, so I'm going to keep them home from school forever, right? It's like understanding, I really know the situation at school is stressful and scary, and we got to figure out a way to get you through it, because if you don't get through that, it's going to actually get worse, right? We want to give you the practice, being successful, sitting with some of that anxiety, lowering it a little bit, sitting with it and getting through it.
Does dysregulation ever look like a kid who comes home from junior high or high school and does homework for 7 straight hours? Is that also considered dysregulation of some sort? We were talking about a kid who might struggle over his homework or say, forget it, I don't want to do this. This is boring. I hate this, whatever. But there are also the kids who are burying themselves and never looking up.
It's a really great question. I'm not sure that I would define that behavior as dysregulation, but I do think that it absolutely can be associated with negative emotions, or with things like anxiety and stress, and can be a coping mechanism that is not a healthy coping mechanism. And so it's a way that they're seeking control. The one thing that I have control over in my life right now is getting those straight A's. And so I am going to work myself to the bone to get those straight A's at the cost of my mental health and my sleep and my, good healthy eating habits and all these other things. And so I think that can pose a world of challenges on its own. I don't know that I would lump it necessarily in the group of dysregulation.
Okay, that makes sense.
I will say I have a colleague who's an eating disorder therapist. And what you're asking kind of reminds me of, she was just saying people are at such extremes. So like you're describing this boy who's focusing 6 hours, 7 hours on his homework as a way to control, I'm sure, some of the anxiety and feelings. And the eating disorder specialist would say they've never seen a greater incidence of eating disorders, unfortunately, as during the pandemic. Because again, people would just be like, how can I control things that are so out of control? Well, no one can make me eat but me. I can control my eating or exercise for 5 hours a day or whatever. So I think we are seeing some extreme behaviors, and I think it is about control in the end.
Do you think it's surprising to parents that this pandemic has taken such an effect on their kids? Like, I think sometimes parents think, look, I'll take care of all of this. We're fine. Everything will just be fine. I've got this. You just huddle in and do your thing. And I wonder if parents have even really given enough credence to the effects that all of this uncertainty and change has had on their children.
And I think what I would say to that is it feels to me like many parents, particularly those around here in our community, did, or at least at this point, do seem to understand the adverse impact of some of this. And so when our children were at home and trying remote learning and everything just felt extremely chaotic, I think there was more of like a one-to-one connection between emotions and that. What I'm finding now is that a lot of people seem to think, well, they're back at school now. Life looks mostly normal again for them. And now there's a disconnect with why are they still feeling so dysregulated? Why is there still so much negative emotionality? And so it's that piece about it takes time and the regression that's happened and the long-term impacts of this level of stress and anxiety and uncertainty. And again, as Lee was talking about, the trickle-down effect of that it has had and still has on the parents and the teachers and those that we have surrounded ourselves with. I think that's the part that we're having a little bit of a harder time making sense of.
And even just the school, I mean, I know they're back and it's wonderful, believe me, but you see them, if you've ever volunteered at lunch, you see how they sit at their lunch table and it's weird. I mean, they're 6 feet apart, like at these long, tables so they can't really chit chat. So life is back in a way to normal, but it's still not. And I think the kids are still feeling that. I think they don't really get a lot of practice just being unstructured with their friends, at least at these younger stages because of kind of the shifts we've had to make. So I think they're still feeling a lot. And we do have to acknowledge, Amy, to your point, that this is still really hard. I do want to say on a more positive note, because this seems very heavy, I do want to say that I also see kids being very resilient. And so part of my brain always goes to like, wow, they've been through so much and yet they're totally able to do a lot more, than I would expect in certain ways. So I think we see both. We see the resilience, which is really wonderful. Again, the kids don't seem, for example, to mind. A lot of the kids don't seem to mind wearing the masks and they're happy to just be with their friends. They appreciate the littler things. So that's always really heartwarming to see. They're really grateful for things they might not have thought about before, just taken for granted.
That's a good place for us to kind of end since it's a little bit of a up note. I feel as though the three of us could continue to talk for a long time, but we are going to keep this to a reasonable time limit here. So Lee, we do have a couple questions that we like to ask of all of our podcasters, personal questions. Would you mind answering them for us?
Sure.
Following in the footsteps of some of the podcasters we listen to, Brene Brown, we'd like to follow up with our guests by asking, what do you do to calm yourself when you're feeling escalated?
That's a great question. I mean, in the short term, like if I'm in my house, I think I absolutely will, on a good day at least, excuse myself and make a cup of hot tea, really truly just need to have the physical space. And I hope the kids realize that too. Like if they're feeling intensely emotional, it's kind of good. It's a good strategy to sometimes just have space, right, to yourself in that moment. But longer term, I get a lot out of being in nature and walking. So I don't love, necessarily like like boot camp exercise, but being outside on a walk with a friend, having a cup of coffee in my hand, that feels really good in nature to me. So even on a winter day, I'll bundle up and do that. I listen to music also. I can always listen to a musical and it will put a smile on my face. Can do a little tap dance for 5 minutes.
Have you listened to Six?
No, I have to. I have not. But yeah, music changes your mood really pretty quickly.
Thank you, Lee. And our last question was, what is the one message that you want everyone to know about mental health?
I'm really grateful that we live in an area where it seems like many people, not all, but many people feel comfortable asking for help. We've noticed even in our waiting room, because we're a group practice, that, at least pre-COVID, in our waiting room, people were chit-chatting with each other and did not seem to feel a sense of shame at needing help, wanting help. And so I think that that's just so important to continue to be open with friends, with family, to be vulnerable, because it always feels better to know we're not alone. And I think that if people are really honest, everyone needs support, especially during this time, but there's nothing shameful about asking for help.
Yeah, to echo what you said as we conclude here, parenting is difficult. Parenting during this time is particularly difficult. We are really grateful that you gave us the time you did today and all of your wisdom so that we can continue to do the best we can.
My absolute pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Lee.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Catch Conversations, Parenting the Mental Health Generation.
Stay current on all Catch programming by liking us on Facebook at Catch Is Community or by visiting our website, catchiscommunity.org.
If you don't have your mental health, you don't have anything. There is a community of people out there that understands it. Find it.